Thanks so much for joining us today. So you might have seen the title card for this video and you might have thought, like, that's not what's in the news right now. And yeah, I mean, usually I like to talk about what's going on in the news, cover some of the stories, talk about what's going on and like what you should be paying attention to. But I also know that the news sometimes gets really boring, and I know, I guess for the first time, like this past few days in news, since Wednesday, I guess, has not been exclusively something new every single day. And it's pretty much been just the same stories that have built on. And so obviously, I know that there's stuff that's still going on, especially in the department with Ukraine and Russia. And I definitely want to talk about that. But today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. But Wednesday, we'll get back into the grind. But as you saw on the title card today, we're talking about the next options for former Vice President Kamala Harris. You might recognize that name. She was the woman who ran against Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election and lost. And ever since she lost the election, she has gotten a lot of prominence in Democratic circles. Like, people have still kept an eye on her, and I'll talk about it later in the episode. But like, she is uniquely positioned as a Democrat who lost the presidential election, who's not been absolutely hated by the Democratic Party. One of the weird tendencies that the Democratic Party has is to completely shun the people that lose their elections, or they make the decision on their own to just leave and never deal with politics again. But uniquely for Harris, I think the way she views her future can be best summed up in this clip. Take a look.
And our work is not done, and as you all know me, because we have spent long hours, long days, and months and years together, it is not my nature to go quietly into the night. So don't worry about that.
So that was Harris on her last Friday as vice president. There's a ceremonial thing where vice presidents sign the desk that they use, like the ceremonial desk, and they just signed the ceremonial desk. And so she said, I'm not going to go into the dark night. And it's also come amid this suggestion that she's told her advisors to keep her options open. And so we'll talk about some of those options today, and we'll see what like her next path and her next steps might be. And we'll read into some of the tea leaves that we've been getting from her office now. Okay. So first option I think that we can talk about is a run for governor of California. And this is the one that's gotten some attention, at least, and I'll tell you why. Harris has deep ties to the state of California. She served as their attorney general. She served as their U.S. senator before becoming vice president. And so California statewide politics, like, that was a big part of who she was for approximately 10 years. And she still stays in touch with her home in California. And so uniquely, there's going to be this open gubernatorial race in California because Governor Gavin Newsom is going to be term limited and he can't run for another term. So that creates this really nice opening for Harris to make a run for governor. And so some of the evidence that we might have gotten is that immediately after Trump was sworn in as president of the United States on January 20th, Harris didn't go home. Harris didn't go to a party. Harris didn't do anything. She went straight to this neighborhood in Altadena, California, where, as you know very well, there have been a lot of fires, the wildfires that have been devastating, including Harris's own neighborhood. Like, that has also been hit by these fires. So she went to visit people in Altadena and to pass out food and whatnot, and provide help with the relief efforts. And she spoke to families in Altadena, which I think maybe it's a neat way to garner love from the public, but I also think it's a good immediate first step. As soon as she's done being vice president, she went straight to Altadena to talk to Californians that have been affected by the wildfires. And, it's like a continued commitment to her home state. But also, granted, it's like near her own neighborhood where her house is, which was not affected by the fires, which she was very lucky of that. But if we look at the polling in the California gubernatorial race, so as you know, Gavin Newsom is term limited, so he's not running in this election. And so in the race, a poll came out, and it polled Harris among the crowd of potential candidates, and she leads with a staggering 57% in the poll. 57% of likely Democratic voters would support Kamala Harris in a California gubernatorial election. That is a sweep. Like, that is just a sweep of support. And mind you, in California, they have a jungle primary system where basically everyone, regardless of party, can run. And then the top two end up in a runoff in November. So Harris is winning 57% in just that section. And a Capital Weekly poll said that Harris was leading with 27% among all voters. So not Democrats. Among Democrats, it's 57, nearly 60%. Among all voters, it's 23%, closely followed by a Republican businessman named John Cox at 21%. Which you think is not a big amount, but when you think about like how many candidates might run for governor of California, if you're winning 23, a solid like quarter of the vote, that's enough to move to a runoff. And that's a pretty impressive amount. And 60% among the Democratic base is a, huge number. I can't even think of the word right now, but it's a huge number. And so other candidates in the Democratic primary, other Democrats in this race are noticing that. And so they are thinking, like, should I run? Representative Katie Porter, you might recognize that name because she ran for U.S. Senate to replace Dianne Feinstein, or fill her seat. Adam Schiff ultimately won that election, but she ran in that race. She's pretty well known statewide, and she said that she would be interested in running for governor of California, but she said that the field would clear if Harris ran. Representative Porter said that. Other potential candidates include former Speaker of the California State Assembly, Antonio Villaraigosa, and Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis, who actually already has been running. And it should note that like California governors, like there's a pipeline for lieutenant governor to governor pipeline, and Kounalakis, has been running in this race for a while now. She's actually been a declared candidate for quite a bit. So, Harris running in this election might throw a wrench into some people's plans, but ultimately, I think running for governor in this state is going to be quite the interesting move because going from vice president to governor, it seems like a bit of a demotion if you think about it. And yeah, maybe. But then again, vice president doesn't have any executive authority, whereas governor of California, you are essentially running 1/8 of this country. Like 1/8 of the population lives in California and so is affected by those decisions. And so, I don't know, I feel like you could call yourself a mini president. And if she ran for governor, she could run on introducing all of her policies and then at a state level and say, look at how well these worked, and then take them national? Maybe, I don't know. There's a Gavin Newsom element in this all as well, too. He's not running for governor in 2026. He'll be out of a job by then. He's going to run for president, I get this feeling, in 2028. And his national ambitions might influence it. Maybe he ends up being a stronger candidate in a Democratic primary than Harris. And maybe Harris makes that assessment and decides to instead run for governor of California instead of butting heads with Gavin Newsom. I mean, that's something that goes into the calculus. But that's one option. That's the first option, running for governor of California. Next option is to run for president again. And if you asked me immediately after the election, I would have said that she's running for president again. If you ask me today, I also kind of think she's running for president again. But in the middle of that, there was a time where I didn't think she would run for president again. And that's why I put that as option number 2. And it's because if you look at the 2024 election, Harris got 226 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 312. That was his biggest victory by far. Like, it was just a huge, commanding victory. At least Hillary Clinton won Nevada in the 2016 election. Harris didn't even win Nevada. And so it's like, it was Donald Trump's biggest win. But the point that people never seem to make is that Harris had just 100 days after Joe Biden dropped out, then she became the candidate. Like, she was only the candidate for 100 days, a little over 100 days, and she somehow to run a campaign like Joe Biden had been running for essentially 4 years, or Obama had been running for years when he was running for president, or Donald Trump, who was basically running from the moment he left office in 2021. Harris had 100 days. And in 100 days, she managed to take the party where it was at and it was abysmal. Like Joe Biden, when he dropped out, like Democrats' chances looked abysmal. Harris managed to take that and turn it around and make it an upsetting 226, but a relieving 226. Like it wasn't as bad as it could have been had Biden run. And Biden still believes he could have won the election, but the numbers pointed otherwise. And if you look at her approval ratings, and I said this at the top, compared to other Democratic candidate losers, as in like people who've lost the presidential election, Harris actually polls a lot better than previous candidates. And so when there was a lot of talk of Hillary Clinton running in 2020 after losing the 2016 election, I mean, she wasn't interested in running again, but like her approval rating was never as nice as Harris has it right now. And Harris has stayed silent about like running in 2028, mainly because she wants to, again, keep that option open. And compared and like another example of where we might think like some of the tea leaves we're reading, there was a DNC chair election. DNC is the Democratic National Committee. They basically run elections for Democrats on a nationwide level. And so they had an election for their chair after the election. And so that just happened earlier this month. And so the top three candidates were Martin O'Malley, Ben Wickler, and Ken Martin. And Harris spoke with all three of these candidates. She's not even in office right now. She's just a former vice president, okay? She spoke with all three candidates. Not even Joe Biden did, actually, and he was the last president. She spoke with all three and then told them that she expected to work closely with each of them. Okay. DNC chair obviously does a lot in terms of elections. So to say that you're going to work very closely with them is going to be very interesting to note. But whatever. I mean, Harris can say what she wants. So that's another example. And when we're reading into those tea leaves of like what exactly Harris might be thinking, there's another thing though when it comes to a presidential campaign, which is, and specifically to Harris, which is that she ran two presidential campaigns before. The first one was the 100-day campaign I told you about, and the other one was this really year-long campaign that she ran the first time for president. She announced on Martin Luther King Jr. Day in 2019, 6 years later, Donald Trump would be getting sworn in on MLK Day, just to point out some historical interestingness. But no, she ran for president, ran for a whole year, but she actually never made it to winning any votes. She dropped out of the election before any votes were cast in the primary. That was the first time. Second time, the whole primary happened, and then Joe Biden dropped out and made Kamala Harris the nominee. So Harris has this unique position where she has the prominence of being a presidential candidate, getting a national figure status, having never actually run in a primary, having never earned a single primary vote. I think that's really interesting, actually. And I mean, you could say like, yeah, she was on Joe Biden's ballot because she was Joe Biden's running mate in 2024, but come on, no one's voting for vice president. So that's another thing. That's another thing to point at. She's never actually run in a primary. So even if she ran this third presidential campaign, I would expect her to make it into the primaries, like the actual Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primary, and that sort of thing. I just don't know if necessarily she would be making it as, I don't know if I guess, well, no, it's not even that. It's just she's never actually run and won votes in that type of scenario before. So that would be interesting to track. Another tea leaf to read into for a presidential campaign is this thing called Pioneer 49. Politico was the first to report this, but before leaving, in the role of vice president, Harris created an LLC called Pioneer 49. And basically, it was the same naming convention as Obama's Renegade 44. And this LLC is basically supposed to support Harris in her efforts going forward. And a lot of people will read it as teeing up a presidential campaign or remaining prominent in national politics. And the reasoning for creating things like that is for speaker events or booking things or running an office. Like, there are things that she might want to do with a big LLC that she could use to help propel her name and public image. And she's doing just that. So she created Pioneer 49. It's based in California, governor of California, hint. But it's more nationwide focused, and it's not like, it's a very obvious sign that she wants to stay in the discussion. And I think creating an LLC like this is plausible. It's something that can be done. And she's done it, and I think it's something that can help her. We'll see. We'll keep an eye on Pioneer 49 and see what they're doing. But that is option number 2. Option number 3 is probably the one that most Harris fans will never want me to say, which is exiting politics altogether. That is another choice. And I don't know, from all that we've just talked about, all the evidence that I've just provided to you for the first 2 options, I don't think this is the option. I don't think she's leaving politics. I think Harris is very young. She's 60 years old, which is young for politicians. I mean, her boss was 82, so, she's got plenty of time. But my point is that she's 60 years old. She has a lot ahead of her. To retire right now would be like, it'd be malpractice in politics. I don't think you should retire at 60 years old. That's too soon. And especially for someone in Harris's position who can be president, who has the skills and the qualifications to be president, it shouldn't be done. But that's another option that is being discussed. And the alternative, get a nice multi-million-dollar book deal, live your best life. I don't know, she's from California, so like there's not a limitation in options of where she can live, nice places at least. But then there's like those things like she could run an advocacy firm or something. She could, I don't know, become a national leader, just be on the sidelines, but not necessarily be in the political discussion anymore. But I don't think that's in her nature, and I think that she's definitely going to stay in politics. Now there's another option, and this is the more unconventional, the more unorthodox option that she could potentially pursue. And I think this is probably the most sleazy of the options, which is to be governor and then immediately run for president in 2028. That means doing both options 1 and 2. And I just discussed the merits of both options, of running for governor and running for president. But this choice of running for governor, like putting all your soul into a entire governor election, and then just deciding that, after winning, because it's almost guaranteed. I bet my money on the fact that she would win a governor's race. She wins the governor's race and then immediately just launches a presidential campaign. I don't know. It seems a little, it doesn't seem appropriate to do something like that. But there's that option that instead of doing something like that, like she could instead just wait it out and like run in 2028. If you look at the polling, like it's not bad compared in a Democratic primary. Like we said in governor, I said it's all but certain. She leads among all candidates that are running. In a Democratic primary, she has the name recognition. And so a poll had her with 41% support against Pete Buttigieg's 9%. Pete Buttigieg was the second place person. He has 9%. So Harris, no matter what option she takes, she's in the dominant position to win. Like right now, she's the favorite to win. So if Harris decided that she wanted to be a little extra, she could decide that, you know what, I can confidently win a governor election. I can sweep into office. That helps build momentum for a presidential race. And immediately in 2028, I can run for president and win in 2028. J.D. Vance did something like that, I guess. He won the 2022 Senate election and then just 2 years later became the vice president of the United States. I still think it's a little, not sleazy, well, I'd call it sleazy, just a little bit, that she decided to do something, that she would decide to do something like that. I would think the more prudent option would be to run for governor of California in 2026, wait one cycle. If Democrats don't win, then you run in 2032, or you run in 2036, serve the full term, and establish policies, build the base for yourself, and build that like policy portfolio and policy specialization. That's not a bad choice. And I think it'd actually be smarter. There's Richard Nixon. We don't talk about Richard Nixon and Kamala Harris being very similar that often, but both were people from California who both became vice president, who both had to take a break from politics. Richard Nixon ran for governor of California. He lost and actually said that you would never hear from me again. 6 years later, he became president of the United States. Maybe Harris is looking at Richard Nixon's playbook. Not the Watergate stuff. I don't think anyone is, but like that electoral aspect. Like maybe she's thinking like maybe I run for governor. Maybe I run for governor and then I build a base and then I run for president after that. Or maybe she just runs for president. Or maybe just steps out of politics altogether. But whatever it is, you know me. I love covering presidential politics, and this is like basically my hobby. So I'll be keeping an eye on Vice President Harris, and I'll be sure to bring her up in episodes and talk about what she's doing. I'll provide little updates from time to time. But here's something I'll leave you with. The decision that Harris has to make, you will know by summer what she wants to do. If she decides that she wants to run for governor of California, she needs to make that decision by summer. If she doesn't make a decision like that by summer, she's running for president. I just know it. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next few years. And when it comes to a Democratic primary, Democrats in California, Democrats across the country, keep your eye out for Vice President Harris, because the moves she decides to make are going to shape the next 4 years of Democratic politics. If you like my commentary, then go ahead and subscribe. Follow us on Spotify. Check out the IshanSShow.com for more Ishan S. Show content. Subscribe to the political news blog to get more updates about political news. Follow us on social media. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today for this episode. We'll see you on Tuesday for another Meet the Trump Administration episode. I'll see you in the next one.